If that little girl has a balance, I'll pay her double, right now in front of everyone. The words slammed across the grand lobby of Ledger Key Bank like a gavel in a courtroom. Marble columns echoed with laughter. Polished shoes squeaked as heads turned. Suits paused mid-stride. And in the center of it all stood a small black girl, no older than 7, clutching a worn teddy bear and a jet-black titanium card that didn't match her age or attire. Her name was Lisa. She had stepped through the revolving glass doors only moments earlier, alone but not uncertain. Outside, a sleek black car had pulled away. Her father, Oliver Lawrence, had leaned down just before she entered, placing the card gently in her hand. "This is yours now," he'd said softly. "Go in, show them. Don't explain yourself. And remember, no matter what they say, you belong." Now, beneath soaring ceilings and gold-trimmed fixtures, Lisa stood on tiptoe at the teller's counter. She slid the card forward beside her teddy bear. "I want to check my account," she said. Her voice was quiet, not afraid, just certain. The teller blinked, then chuckled. "Where did you get this, sweetheart? You find it on the sidewalk?" Around them, the lobby began to hum with amusement. A few onlookers turned. A man in a navy blazer chuckled behind his hand. That's when Martin Elridge appeared, branch manager, confident smirk, loud voice designed to command. He looked at the girl, then the card, then back again, with mock surprise. "If that little girl really has a balance," he said, raising his voice, "I'll pay her double, right here, right now." Laughter followed. Phones were raised. The air crackled with condescension. Lisa didn't flinch. She just clutched her teddy bear closer and kept her chin up. The teller, still half smiling, took the card. He slid it through the terminal. Once. Twice. Then the machine beeped. The screen flashed. His fingers froze above the keyboard. His expression dropped. Martin." Martin stepped closer, grinning, until he saw the screen. His face blanched. The account wasn't just real, it was seismic, a balance that could buy the marble floor beneath their feet. The lobby fell into stunned silence. Then the glass doors opened again. No one laughed now. Oliver Lawrence entered. He wasn't wearing a suit. No flash. No security entourage. Just calm, collected authority. The kind that made people step aside without knowing why. He walked directly to Lisa and placed a hand on her shoulder. "This card," he said quietly, "belongs to my daughter." And with that, everything in the room shifted, because what they didn't know, what they hadn't bothered to consider, was that Lisa wasn't just someone's child. She was the heir of the man who owned the bank they all worked for, and the reckoning had only just begun. But before we begin, if you felt the weight of Lisa's courage as she stood against doubt, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from and how her story moved you. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so more voices and stories like Lisa's can be heard. The air inside Ledger Key's flagship branch had gone still, the kind of quiet that only follows a gasp too sharp to breathe through. Oliver Lawrence stood beside his daughter, his presence measured, still, but brimming with something cold and contained. He looked like a man in no rush, because he didn't need to be. Time bent around people like him. Every step, every glance, carried its own kind of gravity. "This card," he repeated, his voice low but unmistakably clear, "belongs to my daughter." Martin Elridge opened his mouth to speak but found no words waiting. The teller stood frozen, still holding the printed slip that had shattered every assumption in the room. Lisa didn't move. She simply looked up at her father, her teddy bear still held tight in the crook of one arm, the card resting like a challenge on the counter. Oliver didn't look around, not yet. He was only interested in the two men who had humiliated his daughter. He turned first to the teller, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble. "Your name?" Oliver asked. The teller cleared his throat. Jason Miller, sir." "You laughed," Oliver said, "before you verified anything." Jason nodded slowly, guilt blooming across his face. Then Oliver turned to Martin. "And you," he said. "You made a promise. You said you'd pay her double." Martin's face was pale. His confident smirk had long since vanished. "It was," he stammered, "meant as a joke. I didn't know—" "You didn't ask," Oliver cut in. "That's the point." His eyes flicked toward the teller's terminal. "Print the slip." Jason hesitated, then moved quickly. The machine hummed, then spit out another balance receipt. He offered it toward Oliver, but Oliver didn't take it. "Give it to her," he said. Jason turned toward Lisa, his hand shaking slightly. She stepped forward on her tiptoes again, reached for it, and took it without looking away from him. Her teddy bear never left her side. She folded the slip once, tucked it into the back pocket of her dress, and stepped back beside her father. Now Oliver looked up and looked around. Customers stared from every direction. Some were recording. Others lowered their phones, too ashamed to keep filming. A few whispered to each other. One woman shook her head, mouthing, "I'm sorry." Oliver scanned the crowd like a man surveying something he already owned. "You saw a child walk into a bank with a card you didn't think she should have," he said. "And your first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was mockery." No one spoke. No one asked who she was. No one asked where she got the card. Not one of you treated her with respect until a number on a screen changed your tone. Someone near the back murmured, "That's not fair," but didn't say it loud enough to be held accountable. Oliver raised his voice, not a shout, but a controlled rise that somehow cut through the room. "This little girl," he said, "is Lisa Lawrence, my daughter, the sole heir to Lawrence Financial Holdings." He let that settle. "The card she carries was issued to her with my authority. The balance it holds is entirely hers. And for those wondering how that's possible," he took a step forward, "I am the majority owner of Ledger Key." A gasp swept through the lobby. Someone dropped their coffee. A nearby guard turned toward the front desk, as if awaiting instructions from someone he suddenly realized outranked the manager. Oliver continued, "Months ago I began acquiring silent stakes in this institution through a series of private equity channels. I consolidated those shares last quarter. As of this morning, I hold 51.4% of the bank's controlling interest." He paused, let it hit. "So if you're wondering whether the child you mocked belongs here," he said quietly, "I suggest you remember who owns the floor you're standing on." The silence was no longer shocked. It was reverent, like a courtroom watching a verdict unfold. Oliver turned back to Lisa, bent down slightly so they were eye to eye. "You did exactly what I asked," he said gently. "And I'm proud of you." She gave a small nod. He straightened again and looked at the teller one final time. "You owe her more than an apology," he said, "but I won't ask for it now. Some things you'll have to live with." Then, turning to Martin, Oliver delivered the final blow. "Every insult hurled at my daughter today will echo far beyond this marble lobby." With that, he placed a firm hand on Lisa's shoulder, and they walked out, together. The lobby remained frozen, as if afraid that even the sound of their footsteps might offend. Outside, the world was already waiting. The glass doors slid open to a flashbulb storm. Reporters angled for a better view. Microphones surged forward. Shouts from journalists ricocheted through the morning air. "Mr. Lawrence, is it true you own the bank? Was your daughter denied service? Is that your card she was holding?" Oliver didn't stop. He didn't need to. The images were enough. The little girl walking beside him, her hand in his, teddy bear pressed to her side like armor. Lisa glanced once at the cameras, then looked back at the card in her other hand. Behind them, the lobby of Ledger Key still hadn't recovered. Inside, customers began whispering. "I didn't realize who she was. That poor girl. She looked so scared, but did you see how she stood there?" Jason, the teller, sat back down, head in his hands. Martin stood unmoving behind the counter, jaw clenched, red creeping back into his face, but not from embarrassment. Something else burned behind his eyes now. By the end of the day, the footage would be online, and within hours, the story would spread far beyond the doors of Ledger Key. A child had been humiliated, at her own father's bank, and the world was about to find out. It started with one video, shaky, vertical, and shot from behind a potted plant near the teller line. A voice laughed off screen. Another muttered, "Oh no, he didn't." And then there it was. If that little girl has a balance, I'll pay her double, right now in front of everyone. A pause, then the laughter, then Lisa, quiet as a whisper, stepping up on her toes. I want to check my account. The video showed the teller swipe the card, showed the smirk vanish, and caught Martin Elridge's smile collapsing as he read the slip. It captured the moment Oliver Lawrence walked in, the hand on Lisa's shoulder, the calm fury in his voice, the silence that fell like a dropped curtain. By the time the sun set, the clip had crossed 1 million views. By morning, it had circled the globe. Hashtags erupted across every platform. You double if you have a balance. Respect Lisa. You teddy card girl. Screens flooded with stills of Lisa in her blue cotton dress. Teddy bear pressed to her side, chin slightly lifted. Artists drew portraits. Journalists posted think pieces. TikToks popped up comparing her composure to civil rights icons. Celebrities began sharing the clip, adding quiet messages like, "Watch till the end." This child is the moment. Silence has power. The moment was no longer just a video, it was a movement. Cable news picked it up first. This is the clip that's making waves across the country. A young black girl walks into a bank, her father's bank, and gets mocked by the staff for simply asking to check her account. By noon, every major outlet had a version. Bank humiliates child heir. Daughter of billionaire mocked in own branch. Teddy bear and titanium. How one girl exposed a bank's bias. The footage played on loop. And soon, so did the questions. Why did they assume the card wasn't hers? Would this have happened to a little white boy in a blazer? What if her father hadn't shown up? Interview requests poured in. Everyone wanted a quote, a statement, a response. Oliver didn't give them what they wanted, but he gave them something better. A single camera, a neutral backdrop. His voice, calm and measured, filling the screen. My daughter walked into a building that belongs to her family, he said. She was treated like an intruder, like a thief, like a joke. He held up the printed account slip. This is what changed their minds, not her name, not her dignity, a number. But let me be very clear, that number shouldn't have mattered. Her presence should have been enough. He looked straight into the lens. If this can happen to my child, with all the privilege and power I've worked to give her, what happens to children who have none of that? Then added quietly, there will be change, starting here. The clip was shared, dissected, praised. The hashtags surged again. Inside the quiet of their home, Lisa sat on the living room couch, swinging her legs slowly as she watched herself on TV for the first time. She didn't quite understand why the world was so loud about it. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't cried. She'd just done what her dad told her, walked in, shown the card, asked to check her balance. That was all. But people were yelling now. On the news, on the internet, on signs outside buildings that looked just like the one she'd walked into. She glanced at her dad. He was sitting beside her, scrolling his phone with a familiar calm. Daddy? She asked. He looked over. Yeah, baby? Did I do something wrong? Oliver didn't answer right away. He turned off his phone and set it down gently. Then he leaned in, brushed a curl from her forehead, and looked her in the eyes. No, Lisa, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. He smiled, but there was no amusement in it. Just pride and a little sadness. You made them look in the mirror. That's never easy. But it's always right. She nodded slowly, but the question still lingered in her eyes. She turned back to the screen, where her own face stared back at her, caught mid-blink, mid-breath, mid-moment. The next morning, things began to shift behind closed doors. A memo went out from Ledger Key's corporate office. An emergency board meeting was scheduled. HR departments across branches were flooded with inquiries. Staff were reminded of conduct policies. Scripts were reprinted. But one name kept surfacing in every hallway: Martin Elridge. He had gone silent after the incident, ignored calls, refused interviews, stayed home. But silence wouldn't protect him. By the end of the day, the bank issued a statement. Mr. Martin Elridge has been placed on immediate administrative suspension pending an internal investigation into his conduct at the Ledger Key Midtown branch. No apology, just legal speak and delay. But the public didn't wait. Comments flooded the bank's social pages. Yelp pages were review-bombed. Photos of the branch went viral, tagged with captions like, "This is where it happened. Ground zero for drunk Teddy Card Girl." Inside the branch itself, things were quiet. Staff moved with hushed urgency. The teller, Jason, hadn't returned since the incident. Neither had Martin. But Lisa's voice still echoed. "I want to check my account." The phrase became a rallying cry. At bus stops, children said it to each other like a game. In schools, teachers brought it up during morning meetings. In homes, parents replayed the video to talk about prejudice, money, and silence. But through all of it, Lisa remained at the center, unmoving still and somehow larger than life. Her face, captured in one still frame, became a symbol, not just of wealth, not just of race, but of what happens when quiet dignity stands against a room full of noise. And in that silence, something powerful had begun. The boardroom at Ledger Key's corporate headquarters hadn't seen this much panic since the recession of '08. This time, though, the crisis wasn't financial. It was a little girl with a teddy bear and a camera phone that never stopped rolling. "Is this really happening?" murmured one director, his voice low but edged with disbelief. The lights above the long mahogany table glared down on the uneasy faces of executives and legal counsel. A large TV screen at the head of the room played the now infamous footage on a loop. Martin Elridge's smirk, the laughter, Lisa's soft voice. Then the shift, the moment of realization, Oliver's entrance. The video had become a national conversation, but inside these walls it was a PR nightmare. "We need to get ahead of this," said Shelley Gaines, the bank's VP of Communications. Her fingers tapped the table as she spoke. "Issue a more heartfelt apology. Launch a charitable fund in Lisa's name, public gestures." "Absolutely not," snapped Thomas Crane, an old guard board member. "We are a bank, not a stage for social theatre. This entire circus is only escalating because Lawrence keeps feeding it. Every press clip, every movement, he's stoking the fire." "He's demanding accountability," countered another board member. "And frankly, he owns the controlling stake now. He has every right to call for change." The room fell into tense silence. Then someone turned to Oliver. He'd been sitting at the far end of the table the entire time, calm as ever. No tie, no theatrics. Just presence. "Mr. Lawrence," Crane said with forced civility. "What exactly is it you're looking for?" Oliver leaned forward slightly. His voice, as always, didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm looking for a future where no child, mine or anyone else's, is laughed out of a lobby for holding a card with their name on it," Crane scoffed. "Is this about policy or revenge?" Oliver met his eyes without blinking. "It's about responsibility," he said. "Yours, mine, this institution's." He placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. "Mandatory training for all staff. Bias awareness, empathy instruction, and not just frontline workers, executives too." A murmur swept the room. Oliver continued. "Public acknowledgement of the harm done, not the legal kind, the human kind." "And if we don't agree?" asked someone from legal. Oliver didn't answer. He didn't have to. The board knew the weight he carried, knew the quiet leverage of a man who didn't threaten, only moved. Still, not everyone at the table was ready to comply. Far from it. On the other side of the city, Martin Elridge sat hunched in a booth at an upscale midtown restaurant, flanked by a man known for making bad stories disappear. Quinn Atwater, PR fixer, clean-cut, expensive, soulless. Martin looked nothing like his old self. His usual sharp suits were rumpled, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. Shame and rage had been simmering in him for days, unspoken but ever present. "You've seen the video," Martin said, voice low. Quinn nodded. "More times than I care to admit." "I need a narrative," Martin hissed. "A way back. Something that explains all of this." Quinn sipped his scotch. Then we go simple, he said. Standard crisis playbook. We lean on protocol. Martin frowned. You're a manager. You saw a child with a card you assumed was stolen. You followed company procedure. You didn't know whose it was, that's the line. Martin nodded slowly. And Lisa, he asked. What do I say about her? Nothing, Quinn said. Don't speak her name. Don't challenge the child. Challenge the process. Say you were doing your job. Say the issue is being politicized. And Oliver, Quinn smirked. Let him look like the angry billionaire with a vendetta. We play calm, professional, misunderstood. It was a script they'd written for men like Martin 100 times before. And this time, Martin was ready to read his lines. That evening, far from the boardrooms and the press, in a quiet house behind tall hedges, Lisa sat at the kitchen table with a pack of markers and a fresh sheet of paper. Her tongue poked slightly out the corner of her mouth as she drew carefully, slow, deliberate strokes. Oliver sat nearby, reading something on his tablet, but his attention kept drifting back to her. "What you working on?" he asked softly. Lisa didn't look up. "A picture," she said. "Of us." He set the tablet down. "Can I see?" She nodded, flipping the paper toward him with both hands. It showed two figures standing tall in front of a familiar building, one big, one small. The taller one had broad shoulders and dark skin. The smaller one held a teddy bear and a glowing card. Above them, Lisa had written in bubble letters, "We belong here." Oliver stared at the drawing for a long time. His hand closed around it gently, folding it just once, carefully. Then he slipped it into his jacket pocket. Lisa looked up. "Are they still mad at you?" He smiled faintly. "They're scared, baby." "Of me?" "No," he said, reaching out to tuck her hair behind her ear. "Of what you reminded them. That sometimes the smallest voice can be the loudest truth." Lisa looked down at her markers again. "I didn't mean to scare them." "You didn't," he said. "You told the truth, and some people aren't used to hearing it in public." She nodded, then kept drawing. Oliver leaned back in his chair, the folded picture resting over his heart. Outside, the world was stirring with opinion and fury. The internet was already catching wind of Martin's protocol defense. Allies were lining up. Detractors were sharpening their knives. But inside this quiet kitchen, there was only a girl with a teddy bear, a page of color and a father whose resolve had never been clearer. Because now, it wasn't just about fixing a bank. It was about protecting the truth, and the child who carried it. The cameras flashed long before the first word was spoken. At the center of the polished conference room stood a simple podium, draped in navy velvet and flanked by two flags, one national, one bearing the gold emblem of Ledger Key Bank. Reporters filled the rows, murmuring, shuffling notepads, adjusting lenses. Then the doors opened. Oliver Lawrence entered, calm and composed in his charcoal grey suit, every step measured. But all eyes went to the smaller figure beside him. Lisa. She walked quietly, teddy bear in hand, eyes wide but steady. She wore the same blue dress from that day in the bank. Ironed now, pressed, perfect. There was no doubt it was intentional, a reminder. Oliver waited for the room to still. Then he stepped to the podium. "Good morning," he said. "Thank you for being here." He placed a folded sheet of paper on the stand and looked directly at the sea of journalists. "This isn't a press stunt," he said. "It's a reckoning." He paused. Cameras clicked in the silence. 7 days ago, my daughter walked into a bank branch to check her account, an account issued in her name, tied directly to mine. He glanced at Lisa, then back to the crowd. She was laughed at, mocked, dismissed, not because of her behavior, but because of who she appeared to be. He unfolded the paper slowly. "I want to make 2 things clear today." He held up the paper. 1. I am the majority owner of Ledger Key Bank. That is not speculation. It's documented, legal, and complete. He laid the page flat. 2. The balance in my daughter's account, as printed by your own staff, is $72,438,112. Gasps rippled across the room. Phones lit up. Tweets were already flying. Oliver raised a hand, not to silence the room, but to ground it. But this, he said, voice steady, was never about the number. He looked directly into the camera lenses. This is about respect. My daughter was judged by her skin, by her age, by her silence, and that judgment echoed far beyond the teller's counter. Behind him, Lisa gripped her teddy bear a little tighter, but didn't move. Oliver continued. You want a timeline? Fine. I acquired controlling interest in this bank 9 months ago through layered equity channels. My intent was to observe before I acted, to understand the culture before reshaping it. He looked around the room, scanning each face. Well, now I understand it. He stepped back. I will not be taking questions. Then softer, more personal. But I will say this. My daughter's dignity is not up for debate. Neither is her place in this world. He turned and placed a hand gently on Lisa's back. Together they exited the stage. The backlash was instant, and this time it wasn't against Oliver. Public opinion turned hard. Martin Elridge, once considered untouchable inside bank circles, became a symbol of institutional arrogance. Talk shows blasted his behavior. Podcasts dissected the footage frame by frame. An opinion piece in The Atlantic read, "He said he'd pay her double, now he can't pay off the shame." The teller, Jason, appeared on a local morning show days later. He looked like a man weighed down by his own reflection. I was wrong, he said simply. There's no excuse. It was a moment of bias, and I participated in it. I let laughter speak where listening should have. The host nodded, solemn. The audience clapped softly. Jason's apology spread. Some forgave him. Martin, however, refused to speak. When reached by reporters, his lawyer issued a brief statement. Mr. Elridge acted in accordance with bank protocol and expresses regret for any misunderstanding. It didn't land. Memes flooded the internet. One image showed Martin's face captioned, "Protocol, the new word for prejudice." But while the public dragged Martin, another current had started moving. Quieter, deeper. Letters began arriving at Oliver's office. Emails poured in from across the country. Messages from children, parents, teachers. Stories of bank rejections, quiet humiliations, small moments that left deep marks. One girl from Michigan wrote, "I once tried to open an account and they laughed at my ID photo, said I looked like I stole it. I'm 12. A boy from Atlanta shared, "They asked my mom if she was babysitting me when we applied for a savings account. My mom cried in the car after." Some letters included drawings, kids holding cards, teddy bears, even Lisa herself. One envelope was filled with photos of children holding signs that read, "I belong too." Lisa didn't read them all, but she saw the pictures. She noticed the way her father's desk had a special box now, white with blue stars, where he kept all the ones with her name on them. She didn't say much about it, but one night as they sat watching cartoons on mute, she asked, "Am I a symbol?" Oliver blinked. "A what?" "A symbol," she repeated. "That's what the man on the news said. He said I'm a symbol now." Oliver leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're not a symbol," he said. "You're a little girl who stood her ground. But why do people keep talking about me?" He sighed, not with frustration, just the weight of knowing how much she was already carrying. "Because," he said gently, "you reminded people what quiet strength looks like, and a lot of folks needed that reminder." Lisa nodded slowly. "Do I have to keep reminding them?" Oliver didn't answer right away, because deep down he wasn't sure. She was only 7, and the world was already writing meaning into her every step, every silence, every word she hadn't even said. He knew the movement was necessary, knew it was powerful, but he also knew the spotlight could burn. Later that night, after she fell asleep, he stood at her door for a long time, just watching, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Then he went to his office, pulled out the latest stack of letters, and started reading. One by one. Because if the world insisted on building something out of Lisa's courage, then he would make sure it was made of truth, and not just noise. And as the headlines kept coming, as the banks scrambled to issue new policies, as more families came forward to share their own small battles, Oliver Lawrence sat beneath the glow of his desk lamp, doing what he'd always done, protecting what mattered, even when the whole world was watching. A screenshot of an old company document, cropped and redacted, leaked to a low-tier finance blog under the headline, "Is Oliver Lawrence really who he claims to be?" The article was short, speculative, and filled with more questions than facts. But it was enough. Enough to give the hungry something to chew on. Enough to plant the seed of doubt. Within 48 hours, it wasn't just blogs. Larger outlets began echoing the whispers, careful not to make accusations, but loud enough to signal there was something in the water. Unusual acquisitions patterns. Shell companies linked to real estate flips. Was the Lawrence family fortune built on smoke and mirrors? And then, predictably, they turned on Lisa. Teddy card girl or trust fund poster child? Does one child's story deserve this much attention? At what point does privilege look like performance? Oliver saw it coming before the first headline hit. Because he knew Martin Elridge, knew that humiliation, especially public humiliation, wasn't something a man like him would carry quietly. And sure enough, just behind the scenes, Martin had been busy. Still suspended, still silenced by the bank's internal review, he had turned to the same fixer who had crafted the protocol excuse. But this time, Martin didn't want to defend himself. He wanted to attack. He handed over folders, thumb drives, screenshots, anything that might look suspicious if framed the right way. Business deals taken out of context, real estate acquisitions made through blind LLCs, legal, efficient, but complicated enough to twist. Paint him as greedy, Martin instructed, as a man using his daughter as a shield. The fixer nodded. And what about the girl? Martin didn't blink. Make her untouchable, he said coldly. Then show the world she's not. Anonymous sources began popping up. Former employees, former partners, distant connections with just enough rope to sound credible. One claimed Oliver bullied smaller firms out of contracts. Another said he dangled his daughter's image for clicks. A third hinted that the viral moment at the bank had been staged. No evidence, just noise. But sometimes noise is enough. And slowly, the conversation shifted. Social media, once ablaze with support, began showing cracks. Comments under videos turned darker. Something feels off now. Feels like they planned this. Why would a billionaire send his kid in alone anyway? Lisa's name, once a rallying cry, was now met with question marks. Oliver's legal team saw it before he did. They brought the documents to him in a neat manila folder, evidence of leaks, connections to Martin, potential liabilities if public pressure grew. "We need to issue a statement," one lawyer said. "Deny everything, threaten legal action, distance Lisa from the narrative." Oliver closed the folder. "No." "Sir, no," he repeated, firmer this time. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the skyline. "I don't defend my child by hiding her." One of the attorneys sighed. "Then you need to prepare her for what's coming." But Lisa already knew something was wrong. Children always know. That night, as Oliver tucked her into bed, she reached for his wrist before he could rise. "Daddy?" she asked. He paused. "Yeah, baby?" Her voice was quiet, careful. "Are they mad at me now?" The question hit harder than any headline ever could. He sat down on the edge of her bed, the nightlight casting soft shadows on the wall. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "They're not mad at you." He brushed her hair back. "They're afraid." She blinked. "Afraid of me?" He shook his head. "They're afraid of the truth." He leaned in, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Because truth," he whispered, "makes cowards loud." Lisa didn't answer, but she held onto his sleeve just a little longer that night. And as Oliver sat in the darkness after she'd fallen asleep, he knew the next chapter wouldn't be about proving innocence. It would be about reclaiming the narrative, not with numbers, but with clarity, with courage, and with her. When truth is questioned, the wise don't shout. They open the books. 3 days after the first wave of rumors, Oliver Lawrence walked into the same press room where he'd once defended his daughter. This time there was no blue velvet drape, no dramatic entrance, Just rows of reporters, the buzz of live feeds, and one long glass table stacked with files. He stepped to the podium. No introduction, no speech. Instead, he held up a thick white binder. "This," he said, "is every financial document tied to my acquisition of Ledger Key Bank." He placed it down with a quiet finality. "Deeds, wire records, legal filings, it's all here. Every deal above board, every move public record. And this," he added, holding up a flash drive, "is the same information, digitized. I've asked our legal team to make it available online by the end of the day." He looked up. "Transparency isn't a threat when you're telling the truth." The room was silent, but he wasn't finished. "You tried to use lies to silence dignity," he said, eyes narrowing toward the cameras. "But dignity always wins." Then he stepped aside. Lisa stood just behind him. Until now, she'd stayed quiet through every headline, every spotlight. But today, she took 2 careful steps forward, teddy bear clutched tightly in one hand. She looked small against the podium, but her voice carried. "I didn't steal the card," she said softly. Some reporters blinked in surprise. "It was mine. It had my name." That was all. And it was enough. The footage spread across the internet, faster than the rumors ever had. Her words, simple, clear, became a declaration. Within hours, the video hit 1 million views. By morning, it passed 20. "It had my name" began trending globally. Celebrities quoted her, activists rallied around her, and the public, once teetering on the edge of doubt, snapped back with a roar. Ledger Key's board convened in emergency session the following week. This time the tone was different. No denials, no damage control, just decisions. Martin Elridge was officially terminated, his severance revoked. A formal apology was issued, not just to Oliver, but to Lisa by name. And for the first time in the bank's 120-year history, it launched a full-scale equity reform initiative, new leadership guidelines, unconscious bias training, a public commitment to reinvest a portion of quarterly profits into underserved communities. A new era had begun, not because they wanted it, but because the world demanded it. And at the center of it all stood a child who hadn't shouted, hadn't fought, hadn't protested. She'd just told the truth, and made it impossible to ignore. It started with a single sign taped to the glass of a Ledger Key branch in Baltimore. In bright, uneven handwriting, it read, "She had her name on the card. So do we." By noon, there were 10 signs. By the weekend, there were marches. Across cities and states, sidewalks outside banks became gathering places, not just for protest, but for reflection. What had begun as outrage over one little girl's humiliation was now growing into something larger. A movement. Kids arrived at rallies with teddy bears tucked under their arms. Teens wrote, "Respect Lisa" on their backpacks in Sharpie. Parents brought their children and pointed to posters showing Lisa's quiet courage, using her story to teach them about being heard, even when the world tries not to listen. The sign said everything the people couldn't always put into words. I belong too. Dignity doesn't need a dress code. I just wanted to check my account. The moment had become a mirror, and people were finally looking into it. Lisa became more than a name. She became a symbol, not of rebellion or revenge, but of clarity in a world too used to judging before asking. Magazine covers ran her photo with headlines like, "The Girl Who Didn't Flinch," "Teddy," "Titanium," and "The Truth." Dignity looks like this. She never smiled in those photos. Not because she wasn't happy, but because she didn't understand why the world needed her face to understand something so simple. At home, Oliver turned down most of the interviews. He declined brand offers, speaking tours and TV deals. He didn't want his daughter to be consumed by the story that now circled around her. But some things he couldn't avoid. When the Senate Banking Committee sent him a formal invitation to testify about discrimination in financial institutions, he didn't hesitate. He wore no tie that day, no flash. He brought a folder of facts, a voice full of calm, and a story the nation had already heard, but needed to hear again. "My daughter," he said to the panel, "walked into a bank we owned. She wasn't denied because of funds. She was denied because of assumptions." He paused. Let the silence do its work. That silence you feel? That's what it feels like to be unseen. She lived it for 10 minutes. Most people live it their whole lives. Even the senators didn't interrupt. After the testimony, reforms were proposed at the federal level. Policies about how banks train, screen, and respond to customers of all backgrounds. No one could ignore it anymore. Not with Lisa watching. Back at home, life was quieter, but not normal. The driveway had fewer cameras now. The reporters had mostly moved on to other headlines. But Lisa still felt the shift. At the grocery store, people recognized her. At school, other kids stared longer than they used to. She never said much about it. But one night, while sitting on the porch steps with her teddy bear and a box of chalk, she looked up at her father, who had just returned from D.C. "I didn't mean to do all that," she said. Oliver looked down from his seat, brow furrowed. "Do what?" "All this," she said. She waved vaguely, as if motioning to the sky, the porch, the news, everything. "I just wanted to check my account." Oliver smiled. He moved down the steps and sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. "And you changed the world," he said softly. Lisa leaned her head against his arm. They sat like that for a long while. No speeches, no cameras, no podiums, just a little girl and her father, beneath a sky finally quiet enough to hear the truth. The testimony was televised live. C-SPAN didn't usually draw big audiences, but that day millions tuned in. Oliver Lawrence stood at the long congressional table beneath the seal of the United States. To his left, a row of legislators. To his right, the chairperson's gavel. And in front of him, America. He spoke not as a billionaire or a banker, but as a father. "When a child walks into a bank with a card bearing her name," he said, "and is laughed at, doubted, and dismissed, not because of anything she did, but because of what she looked like, that is not a fluke. That is a mirror." He shared the footage. He shared the silence. He shared the numbers, but more importantly, he shared the weight of what had happened, and how often it still does. And when he finished, the room remained quiet. Not out of reluctance, but respect. Because something had changed, and it wasn't just about money anymore. Months passed. The firestorm faded, but the impact remained. Across the country, banks began re-evaluating their systems. Ledger Key led the charge, not because they had to, but because they'd seen what happens when dignity is denied and what it looks like when it's defended. They launched new training programs, hired equity consultants, revised leadership pipelines, and most importantly, they listened. Not to investors, to people. Inside the flagship branch, where it all began, the marble shone brighter now, not from polish, but purpose. Staff walked differently. Managers listened more. There were pictures on the wall now, portraits of families, of children, of everyday customers who had once felt invisible, and in the middle of it all, a new plaque near the lobby entrance read, "Dignity doesn't ask for permission." Lisa Lawrence, now 8, had started something of her own. It began one afternoon with a crayon drawing, another one. She had scribbled a group of children, each holding a card and a teddy bear. Above them, she'd written, "Teach us who we are." Oliver framed it. A month later, he helped her turn that idea into something real. The Teddy Card Project. A non-profit for children who came from less, who'd been told they weren't enough. It offered financial literacy classes, mentorship programs, art therapy, and confidence coaching. The kind of foundation that didn't just talk about change, but built it. In the first 6 months, over 5,000 kids enrolled. And every welcome kit came with 2 things, a starter savings account and a small plush teddy bear, because even symbols need something soft to hold on to. One fall morning, on the anniversary of the original incident, the bank hosted a community event. Oliver hadn't planned to attend, but Lisa asked, so they went. This time no one stared when she walked through the glass doors. There were banners, cupcakes, a kid-sized podium set up near the teller counters, balloons shaped like teddy bears, and behind the counter stood a new manager, a woman named Denise Clark, calm, capable, and kind-eyed. She stepped forward as Lisa approached, bent slightly, and extended a hand. Miss Lawrence, she said warmly. Welcome back. We're honored to have you. Lisa shook her hand, teddy bear tucked tightly under her arm. The crowd watched, cameras raised, not to exploit this time, but to remember. Denise cleared her throat. I wasn't here that day, she said, but I've watched the video, and I've read the letters, and I want to say, on behalf of Ledger Key, we're sorry. She turned to the small girl before her. Sorry we didn't see you sooner. Lisa nodded once. Then she stepped to the little podium. No microphone, no script, just truth. Next time, she said, looking at the staff and the crowd, believe someone, even if they're small. There was a pause. Then applause. Not thunderous, but honest. When the event ended, Lisa walked out of the bank beside her father, hand in his, teddy bear in the other. The marble lobby behind them glowed in the sunlight. So did the world. And as they stepped back into the city, still moving, still learning, still changing, the story of what had happened here wasn't a headline anymore. It was a lesson, a legacy, and a light. They ridiculed her, not knowing who she was. Now the world remembers her name, members.